And
take a break in the middle.
if you're all set, I'm going to go ahead and switch over.
Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the web seminar, Consumer Segments, New Online Research Approaches for Better Understanding. Our featured speaker is Brendan Light with Drew Heath as our moderator, both of Buzzback Market Research. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the event. We will reserve time at the end of the presentation to answer any of them. We will try to get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion. I want to remind attendees that they can ask questions by typing them into the Q&A part of the toolbar located on your screen. This session will also be recorded and archived so that you can refer to it at any time after today's live seminar or refer to other colleagues when I've been able to join us today. We will be sending you a link following the seminar where you can retrieve the archived file. Now about today's featured speaker. Brendan leads research development and best practices for Buzzback. In addition to continually improving the quality of the quantitative and qualitative methodologies and analytics of Buzzback's research offerings, he also pioneered Buzzback's award-winning and patent-pending eCollage and verbatim viewer, and leads the future development and research strategy for Buzzback. He continues to focus on leveraging the transformative powers of the Internet to involve respondent engagement, operational efficiency, and visualization of analytics and insights. Brendan has over 15 years of client and research supplier-side experience, having also served as Research Director for Gray Interactive and as the Global Director of IPSIS ASI Interactive. With that said, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Brendan Light.
Hello, thank you so much for your time today. We certainly appreciate it, and we're excited to be able to share some results from some recent work that we've done. The results we're going to be showing today are a slight departure from what we had in mind when we originally decided to deliver this presentation, because the results we found along the way were actually more exciting than what we had originally thought we would be able to share. So we're going to focus a bit on some very interesting ways to analyze data in a way to better understand your consumer segments, and where we really find this to be a lot of value is in adding depth to some of the profiles that we get from traditional approaches that tend to be a little two-dimensional in terms of descriptive demographics and psychographics. And what we try to do is bring those profiles to life, and that can be anywhere from better understanding a basic exploratory to giving a better personification to your segments that come from a segmentation study. So we can, what we do with several clients is take their segmentation algorithm, use that as screening criteria, and use our approaches to add depth to the information they're getting from their segmentation study. So to start off with, what we try and lay the groundwork is that traditional approaches to understanding consumers tend to be limited in terms of really understanding who these people are. Your ability to get in their head, get in their skin, and be able to understand who they are is very difficult to do from traditional approaches. How I like to think of it is most of the time what we get is something that looks like a present. We can understand the shape of it, we can understand the dimensions of it, but we don't necessarily know what's inside. And what we aim to do is help you open up that package and better understand what's inside. And what we have found to be one of the ways to be able to do that is to leverage imagery, both in terms of what we present to consumers and how they give us feedback back to us is via imagery as well. So here's a little thought exercise to help illustrate the issue. I went onto the Claritas segmentation website, where they have, for all across America, they break down every zip code based on the major segments within their PRISM clustering scheme. And so on the right side of the screen, you see the various segments that were there. And so I have somebody in mind who I know happens to live in this zip code. And I looked through those various profiles to find the one that closest fit the person I had in mind. And so I encourage you to briefly look through the various criteria for inclusion in this segment and get a picture in your mind of who you think this person might be. What kind of a person lives in a zip code where the median household income is $54,000, where they buy Spanish and Latin music, but read The Economist, watch soccer, and drive an Audi A4. And you can see their various demographic traits as well. So hold that picture in your mind, and then compare it to who I had in mind for who actually comes from this zip code. So what this really illustrates is the conclusions we draw by looking at traditional profiles can be very different than who these people actually are. And so our goal is to better understand who these people are. So I have another thought exercise as well to help you understand the value of imagery in terms of getting there. Looking at the series on the screen, think about what comes next in this series. Did you think to yourself that what comes next is the shaded blue triangle? I doubt it. I think that what actually came to your mind was the picture of the triangle. And that's because people think in imagery before they think in words. Words is a higher level cognitive process that comes about after the brain has actually processed information. And our goal is to try and tap into the imagery thinking and try and get at some deeper meanings that way. And it's really important because there is so much documentation establishing that the vast majority of thought is pre-words. It is the image-based thinking that drives the vast majority of decision-making and really defines who we are. It also is where a lot of processing happens via metaphors. And that's the way that information is processed in the brain. When we learn new information, we use an internal metaphor to be able to compare it to something we already know and understand to help us understand the new information. And so metaphor is an incredibly powerful way to communicate back and forth between brand and client in terms of understanding where they're coming from. So what I'm going to do now is show you a tool that we've developed to be able to tap into that imagic thinking. This tool is a collage exercise we've done where we've taken the traditional collage tool that's done in focus groups and really put it on steroids in an online environment to give it a lot more power and a lot more ability to deliver insight. We insert the collage exercise into a traditional survey, and unlike the collage technique offline, because it's all set up ahead of time, it occupies much less time within the experience. But we do find people tend to spend about 10 to 15 minutes creating their own collages. We provide images for respondents to pick from. It is a consistent set of images across respondents, which allows us then to quantify image selection. Because we have a consistent image set, we can look across the entire base and do all kinds of slicing and dicing of the data that way. Once respondents have selected all their images, they then go about the process of getting creative with layout, design, resizing. So some big differences between offline and online collaging is with the online tool, you have the ability to repeat an image as many times as you want. And every respondent has the ability to access those images as many times as they want. They also have the ability to resize images, not so easily done when cutting out from magazines. These collages are delivered for each respondent as they were created. And so we're able to just look at them and get quite a bit of understanding of the things are trying to communicate. It really is true that a picture communicates 1,000 words. There's a real story that is very self-evident by just looking at the collages. But we don't stop there. We actually go well beyond that and probe in terms of what the meaning was that people were trying to communicate. Collage is a great priming tool to get people to think deeper about whatever the subject is at hand. So what I'm going to do now is show you a couple of case studies where we were able to use this tool and get a lot of additional learning from some subsegments within some targets. And we were also able to use the eCollage to find new ways to create subsegments from within the total respondent base. And so it's proven to be a very powerful tool that way. So the two case studies we're going to walk through involve an exploratory study we did on the subject of pain and one we did on the subject of obesity. So the first one I will walk through is for pain, where we spoke with 407 people who indicate that they've suffered pain 2 to 3 times per month typically and have suffered in the past 3 months. We executed the collage in a broader study. It was a full exploratory on the subject of pain, but for the interest of the time we have today, we're going to really focus on the results from the eCollage exercise within that study. You can see at the bottom that the question we asked people was to please create a collage that reflects the emotions you feel about the impact of pain on your life. The first slicing that we did in the data was looking at age groups. And so we found the most interesting break was when we looked at 18 to 45-year-olds versus people who are over 45. And what we learned from the collages and the follow-ups to the collage was that for this group, they typically are able to trace the source of their pain to some external event, be it something like work or exercise or just whatever physical activity they're doing, rather than the pains that just come along with the aging process. So this group also tended to demonstrate a higher ability to cope with the pain in terms of either making it go away or making it subside enough that they can actually do it and continue with their life, but the pain may still be present. At the bottom of the screen, you're seeing 4 of the actual collages that people in this group had created. Here's one specific collage from somebody within this group. And so this is a very typical deliverable that we give for each respondent, where we see the collage that they made. And you can just tell by looking at it, it's a very telling story, imagery-wise. But the text is very informative also. And here's where we really start to understand the metaphors that people are using to talk about their issue. So the major theme here was the helplessness and frustration from this respondent's constant pain. And it's interesting to note how they're able to tell us for many, if not all, of the images that they've used, what that represented to them in terms of the topic. So we do get quite a bit of decoding of the collage, because really it's up to an individual person to ascribe meaning to the images for us. If we look at the respondents in the older age group, it is a very different picture that gets painted, where it not only is it more about the pain being a result of the aging process in general, but it changes from a reaction in a highly physical way to the pain, but there also now is a highly emotional component to the pain, that it really is affecting their overall well-being to a greater degree than it is for the younger respondents. Again, on the bottom, we see actual collages from respondents in this age group. So here is a collage from one particular respondent in this group, speaking about how they are exploding with frustration, constantly doing battle. And the really sad part about this collage is somebody who's feeling the pain is so extreme that they were wishing they were dead or feeling death as the only source of relief. That's some pretty powerful language to be able to get out of this study. We don't typically see those kinds of emotions coming from traditional flat, open-end questions. When we look at these different age groups, we always like to see the things that are in common in their collages between the two. So it helps us to understand, regardless of sub-segment, what are some of the overall themes happening within a subject matter. And here, a lot of the imagery is fairly predictable. So with this, we didn't learn a whole lot new, but where we did get some interesting learning was when we moved to look at unique image selections per group. What are the pictures that the younger age group used in their collages at a statistically significant higher level than the other group? And the same with the bottom row, reflecting statistical significance over the younger group. So there's a key takeaway as a difference between online and offline collaging is this ability to quantify and analyze the images within the study. And you can see just looking at the pictures, we don't really need to have tremendous verbal decoding of the images to see the difference between the groups. But we do also look at those open ends affiliated with these images to find out what did people mean as a theme for image use. Another of the approaches we took to slicing the data was to look at the differences between people who self-define their pain as being a minor issue versus a debilitating condition. And for that, we found that with the minor people, much like the younger people, had a higher level of being able to cope with their pain. And where this really creates a strong point of learning is with the minor pain sufferers, they are far more likely to continue doing what they intended to do with their day with pain involved versus people who have the more debilitating condition simply are stopped in their tracks. The pain overcomes their ability to do the things they want to do, so it has a very, very different impact on their life. So the example from a minor pain sufferer where you can see the kinds of things that this person can do to at least cope with the pain and get on with what they were doing, wanting to do, which often at times turned out to be work or exercise related were the things that the minor sufferers were hoping to be able to do. If we contrast this with the people in the debilitating group, we see a much higher emphasis on people feeling trapped and hopeless, and again, a much more emotional component to the situation. Again, collages on the bottom are actual collages from respondents in this group. I think you can tell by just looking at the collages by now that people are very intentional and thoughtful in terms of picking images, placing them, manipulating them, and you can pretty much tell the themes of various people's collages just from a very qualitative overview of the imagery. This is a specific collage from one respondent with the debilitating condition, and here we can see how it actually is stopping the things that they want to do rather than them being able to cope with it. But this person expressed something that we saw as a theme within this group as well, of the hopelessness of it, that the situation is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And that feeling of being trapped really does trigger the emotional aspect of suffering from pain that we find within this group. If we look at the top shared images between minor and debilitating, I think you'll notice there's a lot of consistency here when we looked at the common images between younger and older people. And that really is because these are the top common images regardless of how we slice the data. There is a consistent set of images that are used, and that is very informative in terms of understanding the broad landscape. But our goal with using the collage technique here was really to better understand the differences between these groups. And so that's where our look at the unique image selections, again, proves very powerful in terms of the imagery used from minor people on the top row, statistically higher than those from the debilitating condition. And of course, the images on the bottom being used at a higher level than those for the minor issue. Again, we can see with the ball and chain there, the handcuffs, very much a feeling of being trapped and hopelessness in the situation. There's an emotional component on the bottom row that simply does not exist in the top row. When we use a tool like Collage, we consistently find that our open ends that follow the collage exercise contain about twice as much language as a traditional open-end of the same subject matter would contain. That creates a lot of language to have to go through. Because there is so much communication via metaphor within these open-ends, we really feel it's important to look beyond doing coding of those open-ends to find meaning that is within it. So if you are going to read through twice as many open-ends, you really need a way to make that easier for you. I've often felt that clients suffer from the amount of work it takes to read through open-ends to find value compared to the amount of time it takes to go through data tables and get value at a much quicker pace and cover a much wider scope of questions. And so I was looking for a way to basically make reading open-ends as easy as it is to reading data tables without losing the value of the individual responses and verbatims. And so how do we augment the value words representing words that are used more often, smaller words being words that are used less often. And we can navigate all of our 407 open-ends by clicking on the words that we want to learn more about. And so rather than having to read through open-ends and finding somebody starting to talk about frustration, I can immediately get everybody talking about frustration. So on the right, now I've filtered down to the 14 of 407 people who have used frustration in their response here. So this is the follow-up to the eCollage exercise. And I can also look at people who are using multiple keywords that are of interest to us and filter to those as well. So I have 3 people out of the 407 used frustration and not just words, but phrases as well. So now we're able to find the 7 people who had my back feels as part of their response. Not only is this a deliverable that we give to clients, but it also helps us in our own analysis to understand what people were meaning by their collages and their images within their collages. It's a very powerful tool to help us to have a much quicker deliverable of our analysis of the collages. So I bothered to walk through showing you this tool because it really did drive a lot of the analysis that you're going to see in the following slides. And we also will be presenting several images of these tag clouds to help you understand words that were used more often and less often in different areas of the survey. So I've walked through showing the value of qualitatively being able to look at the collages, qualitatively being able to read interesting individual open-ends. Quantitatively, we're able to look at frequencies of images that are used and how those help us to understand differences between subsegments. And so I think it is a very important point to make at this time that this is truly a tool that is simultaneously quantitative and qualitative. It's a very big departure from the traditional notion of studies that are quantitative and qualitative, whereas they're traditionally executed where quantitative is juxtaposed next to qualitative, but nothing is ever truly simultaneously both. And this, I would argue, is the first tool that actually is simultaneously qualitative and quantitative at the same time. But we actually took it a step further and did some advanced analytics on this, looking beyond simply the surface level frequencies. We did several analytics on this. The first thing I'm going to walk through is a factor analysis we did. So if you read on the screen here, you can quickly get a sense of what factor analysis is and what we did. But basically, it's a way of trying to identify underlying dimensions within data based on a large set of variables. And so what we're trying to do is see, are people expressing something in their collages that only can be understood when you look at all image use combined? and seeing what falls out of that in terms of common dimensions or factors. And for this study, we looked at both a 4-factor and a 5-factor analysis. We are highlighting today the results from the 4-factor analysis, where we found 4 distinct dimensions of how people were expressing the impact of pain on their life. And it was very, very reaffirming to us when moving from a 4-factor to a 5-factor solution, we didn't completely fall apart in the model, that a lot of the data from the 4-factor model was consistent within the 5-factor model, and that actually helps to reinforce the validity of a 4-factor model in terms of you're not just having random stuff pop out, and it changes depending on the number of factors that you have. So what I'm going to do now is walk through, for this study, I'm going to show 3 of the 4 that were the most easily able to visualize and to communicate in a compressed time like we have today. So these are the 3 major factors that we saw out of this study. And the way to read these groupings of pictures is as though you were reading a book. So it's left to right, and then move down to the next line, left to right. All of these images operate on a continuum that the more they are towards the upper left of these blocks, the higher they contribute towards that dimension, meaning that the more significant they were in expressing whatever these dimensions are about. And factor analysis is a mixture of art and science in terms of the science will help to identify the variables contributing to some underlying dimension, but you have to then look at the variables and try to understand what the commonality is that will define that dimension. And so when we looked at all of the images and when we looked at the open ends that people had within those factors, we felt we had a pretty strong story in terms of what people were telling us. So the first one we looked at was the pain severity group. Now, the tag cloud in the upper left represents people who were scored as being in the top 20% on this dimension. So the combined images that they used were really showing that they were expressing themselves very strongly on this dimension. And the bottom right corner is showing the opposite. And the story that we saw popping out of the pain severity dimension was really about the if you will, the strength of the pain. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much does it hurt? Not what type of hurt is it, just how much does it hurt? And the words that we saw people using to describe the images on this dimension really reinforce this notion to us. And I would contrast that with the nature of pain. Whereas the previous slide showed how bad it hurts, we saw that this dimension was describing what kind of a hurt is it. And so this is a really important finding in terms of the respondents are telling us that pain is more than just one thing. That if you take a trip to the doctor's office and you express to them that you're feeling pain, they're going to ask you on one scale to show how much does it hurt. And what we're seeing already is people don't think of it in just one dimension. That to understand it, we need at least these 2 dimensions. But we also found that there were other dimensions as well. And so the third one that we're highlighting is one we call pain control, which is really about the ability of people to address their pain. And so with this one, the images themselves were much more able to define the story than looking at the words associated with the images. And it was very clear looking at the images at the higher end on this dimension that it was very much about things that they can do to keep their body in shape and to address the pain and to overcome it. And so we've already identified, when we asked people to express the impact of pain on their life, there are at least 3 strong dimensions that people are telling us about. And this goes far beyond the type of understanding we would get from a traditional study with where we're looking at only things such as minor versus major pain being the only dimension to understand differences among pain sufferers. We did a couple of other advanced analytics on the images as well. We did a discriminant analysis and a logistic regression on all of the images. And we were amazed to find that for both of these approaches, the exact same set of images popped out as being significant. Beyond that, if you're familiar with the kinds of data associated with those, you can read the table. But the more important finding for me for this slide, and it may be actually the most important slide of the entire presentation, is by looking at the images people used in their collage, we had a nearly 70% ability to predict whether people were minor pain sufferers or debilitating pain sufferers. That's a pretty phenomenal amount to be able to classify people based on image selection. And why this is really important, well, there's several reasons why it's important, but one of the major ones is we asked people to self-define themselves in the beginning of the study, and one of the options was debilitating. Well, we also saw that debilitating was one of the major words used when we looked at the verbatims. Debilitating was a very large word among this group. Well, we kind of fed that word to them. We introduced that into their vocabulary for this. So we don't know if that is really how they would think in their natural environment to describe their pain. If we don't prime people with specific words, and if we can use a tool like the collage technique to classify people, then we have an even better chance of getting at what they actually think and better understanding the language we use. So we can create better research by using tools like collage to actually dig a little bit deeper and actually get better understanding of who our consumers are. The value of this is very strong, and our goal is to actually refine this so that we can look beyond this set of images. There were over 100 images provided in this study, and these were the 10 or so that were the most important in terms of classifying people. So we can look at removing some of the other pictures and substituting them and running this enough times until we can increase that predictability, even though 70% is a very high level. If you look at the predictability of your segmentation algorithms for predicting people as being classified in the right segment, it's going to be pretty close to 70% being thought of as a really good score. So we're already very comfortable with using things like 70% predictability for putting people into groups. So the potential here is very, very large. So to recap what the major findings were from this case study is within the subject matter itself, we really have uncovered that pain is more than just a degree of severity. There are many dimensions that go along with pain. Many things that there are many ways that people describe the experience. And many of these we really uncovered by using the images. It's also important to notice that between the factor analysis and the discriminant analysis and the logistic regression, all of these were reinforcing something very powerful, which is collage image use and construction is not an arbitrary process. People are actually very thoughtful. The images have meaning for people. The respondents as a group were consistently using images to express consistent thoughts. That there is a real meaning here. And while that may seem somewhat abstract, it's incredibly powerful to recognize the fact that this is a valid application that has statistical support for the fact that we are learning something unique by using the collage tool. And what's also very interesting is we are able to use images as creating a new way of segmenting your group. So rather than simply looking at minor sufferers versus debilitating sufferers, we can use things like the factor analysis to create new subsegments of respondents. Even though there will be overlap within those groups, it helps us to understand ways to create communication and product solutions that address those very specific needs, being whatever those factors are that are being expressed in the factor analysis. So I'm going to move on now to a second case study that we, for today. We actually did several case studies, and these two were the ones we felt were best for the format today. So there's a lot more data than just the two we're showing. And the main reason I'm even going to be showing obesity as a second one is to help you understand that there is more than simply an N of 1 for demonstrating the power of the tool. I'm not going to be as in-depth with the obesity case study because there will be a lot of repetitiveness just in the need to affirm the findings that we found within the pain study. But what we did was we used the BMI calculator, the body mass index, of asking people their height and their weight to classify them on the BMI scale, and we were interested in people who had a BMI score being 25 or greater. And we then looked at people as being from 25 to 30 are classified by the BMI scale as being overweight, and over 30 people are classified as being obese. So that was one of the ingoing assumptions about how to segment respondents and try to learn a little bit more about the differences between obese and overweight people. And we also slice the data in a lot of other ways as well. Another one that we'll show you today is slicing on the age groups. So when we looked at the age groups, we found the most interesting breaks within these were looking at the young, medium, and older people as described here. And we actually found very discrete learnings based on their collage and follow-ups that differentiated these groups. The youngest people were most concerned with the physical appearance that results from being overweight. Their aspirations for losing weight were highly centered around simply wanting to look better. Now, that's not true for every single respondent, but that was definitely the overriding theme that we saw within this group. Where when we look at the people in the middle age group, this was a group of people who really started to transition away from a focus on the appearance, and it was more about their weight being an issue of getting in the way of doing the things they need to do in their life. And so it's where we also start to see a greater impact on their emotional well-being, have a much greater emotional response to their weight. And when you get into the older age group, this was a group where these people have a very unique set of activities that they're looking to try to be able to do, travel being a very high goal amongst this target as differentiated from the younger groups. And for this group, their weight actually was a barrier to the kinds of travel and activities that they want to do. And so we were very pleased that just on the age groups alone, we were able to get some additional learning of the problem of being overweight versus what their ideal weight is. This is an example of a collage from one of the younger people. It's very demonstrative of what we found for this group, where there was a great focus on wanting to look good, a very high emphasis on appearances. Here's a respondent from the middle group, and I find it very interesting that this person could have come from either of the case studies because their weight was creating so much pain for them. And we're expressing that in their collage, both in the collage and the follow-up, and we certainly get the picture of what this person is suffering. At the bottom on the slide, in the text, we see the rebirth to something new and beautiful. That was a theme that we saw from a lot of people, that losing weight and getting to their ideal weight was truly a rebirth for people. It was a chance for them to start over. It wasn't simply a gradual change that was an incremental improvement in their life. Being able to achieve their target weight would truly mean having a new life. Here for the older group, that we see that their goals are focused much more around leisure activities of being able to do once they hit their target weight. And it ranged from simply being able to travel at all to being able to participate in leisure activities that they're not able to participate in currently. Here we are looking at, based on age groups, the most consistent imagery used, which was very interesting to see how out of all of the 100, 150 pictures that were available to people, what a strong emphasis there was on healthy foods being a consistent image choice in terms of what life would be like at their ideal weight. very heavy emphasis on food here, where it's not necessarily what we found as the only finding in the study. We found people are very well aware of the role of an exercise regimen playing into their life, but clearly healthy foods was the dominant, consistent factor. When we start to look at what images were unique among these age groups, we do see a very different story starting to emerge, and this is where we started to get our overall findings of what we've been presenting so far on being the major themes for these age groups. The pictures are very telling. Again, these are all within the group, statistically higher than the other groups. We also, as I mentioned before, looked at people as being classified as either overweight or obese. And here with this slice, we start to move a little bit away from the singular emphasis on food. That for these two groups, what they had in common was a little bit broader in range. And yet when we look at their unique images, we see a very different story. For the obese people and their unique images and the text that they gave to us in follow-up to that, we found a much greater emphasis on the emotional impact of being overweight and the much more aspirational, how much more important the aspiration of being their target weight was to them. Whereas for the people who were simply overweight, we got a much more functional playback from them in terms of the journey to get to their ideal weight. One of the questions that we presented to people, actually in both studies, but we're just presenting it in the obesity study, was if they could use 5 words to describe their situation. And here we see a real re-emphasis on the difference between these groups of the overweight people being much more functionally oriented, whereas obese people, we are moving to a much more emotional orientation. And this is really important because we are with our approaches here, we consistently find that the collage application triggers emotional responses from people. When we do side-by-side studies of collage and non-collage studies, we find that we don't get these kinds of words that we're seeing on the right side here of being more emotionally related. We're able to uncover this kind of thing when we use collage as a priming tool. People are much better able to get in touch with their innermost thoughts and feelings. And so here we're able to differentiate the fact that we have a much more emotionally oriented group of people versus a more functionally oriented group of people. And I find it very fascinating that by using the BMI calculator, just taking height and weight of people alone, and having that be the split in how we look at people, we see such a real and dramatic difference between these two groups of people. It goes a long way to actually validate the value of the BMI indexing for where people belong in terms of being normal weight, overweight, obese, or underweight. We use the BMI calculator quite regularly in a lot of studies where we're dealing with food products, and it really is nice to have the affirmation of the value of that as a screening criteria. One of the findings that came out of this study that we didn't think of in the slightest bit about going into it was from a question we asked about. It was a projective technique where we asked people to tell us what they think are the major misconceptions that people have about people who are overweight. Now, the tag cloud on the left that's visualizing the frequency of word use, that is for a subset of people that is described on the right here, but it basically is the same for all respondents. There's no real differences. That lazy is by far seen to be the biggest misconception about people who are overweight. And yet we see this as being a disconnect for us because this image frequency on the left is representing a group of people who, from all appearances, have no excuses not to be at their target weight. Every possible thing we could look at showed us it is within their means to achieve their target weight, and yet they are overweight or obese and want to actually lose that weight. So where is this disconnect happening? Is this that people actually are lazy and think it is just a misconception? We don't think that's actually the case. We think it's probably more likely something having to do with either ignorance, whereas they don't know what they need to do to get to their target weight. They may have all of the tools at hand to do it and simply not know what to do. Or is it a matter of access, that they don't have the tools necessary? Maybe they live in an environment where their local food opportunities or exercise opportunities are limited. If you're in a much lower income neighborhood, your food choices, your exercise choices, your outdoor spaces become highly limited, and so all of the other factors really don't matter that much. But all we really know coming out of this is we have something else that we need to explore to understand why are these people not at their target weight if it's not about being lazy. Again, we did a factor analysis on this data as well, and for this study we actually found 5 factors that were really meaningful and found very interesting different dimensions that people were expressing to us in their collages. The first one we describe as the role of physical activity, and the important characteristic of this is this appears to be the physical activity that people know they need to do to get to their target weight. And so this is the role of exercise in losing weight. Another one of the dimensions that we found was aspirational foods, the types of foods people feel they need to eat to get to their target weight as well. And so we see that both in the words people use to describe their collages and the pictures themselves. Another one of the dimensions that popped out of the collage image use was one we characterize as a personal journey, that it is more than simply food and exercise that is the path towards losing weight. It is really about becoming somebody different on the inside to get to and to achieve what your ideal weight is. And it does take a very emotional involvement in order to make that journey, and people recognize that it is a very tough, difficult thing to do, and it's easier said than done to simply say eat well and exercise. You really have to embrace this as a journey. Another area that we looked at is what we call active aspirations, and it's really important to differentiate this from the role of activity, which we looked at as the first dimension. What this really showed us was that people were looking to be able to do things activity-wise once they get to their ideal weight. And so this is an important finding in terms of something that we would not have been able to have learned through other means nearly as easily and powerfully as we did here, in terms of activity has 2 very different roles in terms of losing weight. There's both the role of getting to your target weight, and then there is the role of activity in terms of the things you're finally free and able to do and enjoy once you get to your target weight. And those are very different things to these respondents. The final dimension that we found of interest was what we're describing as being toward the reward, that this whole personal journey does have an endpoint and a true satisfaction once you reach that endpoint. People saw it as a great reward, that opening up of new places that they can go and new things that they can do. They are truly rewarded for getting to that ideal weight. It is more than just about looking better and feeling better, that there is a change in your life that does come about from doing it, that there's real value in achieving your ideal weight. When we looked at this by doing logistic regression as well, we were able to have a 60% predictability of being able to classify people as obese or overweight based on their image choice. And so again, we would look to refine the images to increase that predictability, but the fine line between obese and overweight is so different than the line between a minor pain sufferer and somebody with debilitating pain, that the fact we have a slightly lower predictability or ability to classify people as obese versus overweight is still very, very positive news to me that we have just based on image alone, I can have a 60% chance of being right in guessing if somebody is in a BMI range of 25 to 30 or over 30. And we're only going to be able to increase that predictability rate the more that we experiment with alternative images in these studies. So again, when you're wanting to try and avoid having to ask questions that you don't need to in a study that can have a priming effect, it's a very powerful thing. One example here to very clearly illustrate this is we received a lot of feedback from respondents taking the study that were not very happy about the fact that we were classifying them as being obese. We were not actually classifying them as obese, and we went to great lengths to make sure we said the BMI is doing that and referencing what the BMI is and how to learn more about what the BMI is. And we spent a lot of time crafting the screening questions to be as minimally offensive as possibly could be on a very delicate subject. If you can do a question like a collage question and have images put people into those buckets rather than having to ask sensitive questions, you really are unlocking a lot of opportunity for conducting better research. There are a lot of studies that are plagued by social desirability bias that can be overcome by using a tool like Collage, where we can use it as a proxy for those very sensitive questions that we all understand we don't like to have to ask any more than we want to. So what are the major conclusions from both of these case studies? Well, the first thing is, I'm sure that for everybody participating today, you're well aware of the need to get more understanding of what your segments actually are. How do we open up that gift present box that we saw in the beginning and see truly what is inside? Well, what we've demonstrated is images can actually provide that depth. Images can help bring to life the inner dimensions of people on a variety of topics. And we've done this on a wide variety of subjects, not just physiological ones like pain and obesity. We've done it in technology areas. We've done it in a whole bunch of areas. We've done it for, we use Collage in every age group possible and every consumer group possible and consistently find valuable information from it. We also find that it's a really important finding out of this that you can use the factor analysis on the collage to actually create new subgroups. And so that's very important in terms of understanding beyond demographics and psychographics. The deeper dimensions really driving people can create segments that create very specific avenues for you to deliver product solutions, how to communicate the benefits of your products, and how to create communications and marketing pieces that will touch on the issues that people have. And we also provide a very large scope of metaphors that people use to communicate what their situation is. You come out of a collage exercise with an incredible arsenal of tools at your disposal to help you better communicate and connect with your consumers. Thank you. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you may have on the subject.
Great, Brendan. Thanks so much. If anyone has any questions, you can type in your question on the toolbar that's part of the webinar. We have quite a few questions already, and so Brendan, the first one will be around image selection and where the images that are used in the collage exercise come from.
The images, we have internally a database of thousands of high-quality stock images we get from professional stock photography websites. And we will custom pull for each study the images we feel are most appropriate for a project. And we do that in conjunction with the client. So there's back and forth on that as we come to the final image set. Several things go into that decision. One of the first things we look at is what are described as universal metaphors. and that is a listing of 13 categories of metaphors that was constructed by a guy named Andrew Goatley. And Goatley is actually where Gerald Zaltman, who uses the ZMET approach, also drew from Goatley this list of metaphors. And so there are a broad range of metaphors. I'd be happy to send the list along to anyone who needs it to understand it. But it's a good way of being able to look to see, do we have images that people could use to express all of these different metaphors? Now, of course, we don't know until people actually use the images and tell us what they mean in the context of the study, what metaphor they're actually trying to use, but we make sure that when we have 100 to 150 pictures that there's good representation of how people could use them. We also try to have broad representation on a wide variety of other areas and variables, things such as color. We have found that respondents will use color over content as a choice for a picture within the collage, and so we want to make sure we're very broadly represented on color so people can do that. We also try to have balance on things like animate versus inanimate objects, on things like indoors versus outdoors, on things like positive to negative. And so we try to have as broad a representation as we can. Sometimes we'll get clients that will provide images themselves or delivered from their agencies, things that they're wanting to use in communication pieces. And another thing we look at is what images in the past have fed into good predictability for classification of respondents. And so as we saw where with the pain study, we had 70% predictability based on a subset of images. Obviously, those are going to be the first images that we're going to suggest for the next study that's related to pain in any way. We know that those are good images for our study.
Great, thanks. There were a number of questions also around how image selection might affect bias in the responses that people give.
That is absolutely a distinct possibility. I would argue that it is the exact same situation that happens by the fact that let's take any attribute list in a survey. We get a list of 14 attributes and we have no questions. We don't really stop to think about the fact that we let those 14, 20 attributes define a product or communication or a population where it's just 20. We're providing 150 images. And so I would argue that any closed-ended question in a survey is going to be limiting people in terms of the responses. And I would argue that any survey which has a finite number of questions is also limiting. We're never, ever, through any technique, going to be able to capture everything possible about a consumer. So this is really not any different from what we're doing now in terms of limiting the numbers of questions in surveys, limiting the number of response options in a question, or limiting the number of attributes in an attribute battery. But I would argue that having 100 to 150 pictures, where pictures can have multiple meanings that are described by people, is much more powerful, much more broad, and much less limiting than the approaches people are using today.
Great. So, Brendan, another set of questions that people have been asking about are around how this kind of research would be used. How do you see this feeding into the decision-making process, and what follow-on kind of research do you think would make sense to be conducted after you get these kinds of results?
Well, I guess there are multiple different avenues to go down as answers to that question. One is this is quite often something we do as an augment to research already being done, i.e. a segmentation study. A client does a segmentation study with us or with somebody else and comes out of it with their consumer segments. They create an algorithm with a predictability of being able to classify people based on a subset of questions and can use that in further research, and we use that as a way to help personify those segments. The reason we started getting these projects was clients were very frustrated with the flat personification that they typically got coming out of a segmentation study. There were a lot of details psychographically and demographically about these people, and yet it was just as obtuse as the segmentation profile I showed at the beginning of the study. They did not necessarily feel that they knew who these people really were. And so what we're doing is adding on to and not replacing segmentation. So we're taking your segmentation results and giving you more depth. So that right there is one of the ways that it's used. Another is in terms of communications, that we are able to provide imagery that actually resonates with different groups, be it the segmentation groups that you come in with, or demographic or usage groups by screening data, or by groups that we're able to identify via the factor analysis. And another way that it is used is in terms of creating new subsegments versus the traditional ones that people have used. If we look at the pain study, we have at least three different subsegments that we can create. In the obesity, we have 5 different subsegments that we can look at from the factor analysis that are different from any of the subsegments that we had going into the study. And while there can be some overlap within those groups, the important thing is what you're learning is the actual pain points of these people. And we all have pain points for consumers. They all need better solutions in whatever the product it is we're offering. So it doesn't even matter if you're a B2B high-tech company, you can use something like Collage as a means to understand what are those pain points. How do we get to those underlying dimensions to figure out what people's problems are? And why that's important is when you're doing new product development, it's good to have a good idea of the kinds of problems that need solutions, but it's also good to be able to know how to communicate those benefits to people in terms of trying to market those products. So when you're trying to explain what a new product is to people in your category, you'll have a better ability to be able to connect with them in terms of understanding what it is that they actually want out of a product.
Great. So we're a little bit over, but let me ask one more question that came through a few times. And then for those of you that have asked questions that we haven't gotten to, we're able to understand, where those questions were coming from, and we'll be happy to follow up with you offline about those. So the last question, Brendan, is what about multiple geographies? What experience does BuzzBack have in conducting this kind of research across multiple countries?
We have done this globally. One of the questions from today, one of the studies that we dropped out of today's presentation because we were short on time was one we had done in multiple markets. We do them regularly when we do them for multiple markets, one of the things that you have to be considerate of is cultural reference points, and lots of images are significant across a culture, but not across multiple cultures. So you have to be very specific about the images you want to present across markets, and so you need to be sensitive to what those things are, and you need local representation there from the client to be able to get understanding of the most appropriate images. As I said, when we do the image selection, we do it in conjunction with the client. Another area you need to be careful when doing these in multiple markets is in things like your doing factor analysis. The underlying dimensions is another thing that tends to be shared culturally, but can't assume to be shared across cultures. And so for the study that we left out for today's presentation, we had a study where we tried to look at underlying factors globally, and it was just a mess. There was no clear story that the way that there was with the factors I showed you today. But when we broke out the respondents to the local markets and ran factor analysis that way, we were again able to come back to having meaningful stories. So we can execute them, and it should be noticed this is a huge advantage over other collaging techniques, especially offline ones, is we can execute this simultaneously globally. We could literally launch a study today in 20 markets around the world and have results in a week or so for you. That's pretty powerful stuff. We already have the tool localized for every major language that's represented online. So we can do double byte characters, we can do Cyrillic, we can do anything that we need to do.
Looks like we're all out of time. I want to thank Brendan Light and Drew Heath with Buzzback Market Research and everyone who has joined us on the call today. We hope you enjoyed our web seminar. We'll be sending you a link to the archive version shortly. If you have any further questions or need further information, feel free to email Brendan Light at brendan@buzzback.com. Again, thank you for your time.